Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to learn a little bit about databases. Now I know most of you probably just use Excel to house everything. And I get it, that's what we've been doing on the channel because it's easy. Most people have access to some sort of spreadsheet system, whether it's Google Drive, Google Sheets, Excel, OneDrive, whatever it is that you're using to store stuff and save stuff on. It's accessible. And most folks have some understanding and exposure of how to use it. But what Excel is not is a database, okay? And if we're looking at taking seasons worth of data, not just box scores, mind you, but advanced stats all across the board for multiple sports even, we need a database, all right? It's gonna be much quicker to query our data and to get it where we need to be. It's going to be much more dependable on how it stores things, putting in data type controls, things of that nature, to make sure that we're not storing anything in our data that could become problematic if we try to feed it into a machine learning algorithm. Really, it's just a better option all around. So today we're going to start hitting some basics of terminology, options, and how to start thinking about your data as a whole. Now what we're going to be using is called Sqlite, all right? Now Sqlite comes built into Python, okay? There's nothing extra that you have to do. You already have access to it. Python can spin up a database and has all the tools necessary to utilize it with nothing extra on your part. You don't have to go download anything. You don't have to go purchase anything, nothing. You will need to learn a little bit of SQL, which is Structured Query Language, I think is what it stands for. Don't quote me on that. But if anybody's done any work with databases before, you're probably familiar with SQL. The benefit of databases running on SQL, I guess. I don't know where I was going with that statement, but the nice thing, if you don't know anything about SQL and you're like, man, I'm already bogged down, I'm learning Python, isn't that enough? You're gonna make me learn a new language too. I am, but SQL is probably the easiest to understand just reading it. It's going to read very close to English. At least as close as a computer language could be. Like Python's pretty easy to read. SQL's very easy to read too. It makes sense. The commands make sense. It can get pretty complicated learning how to do it, but as far as like figuring out how to do what you want to do. But if you are to see a SQL query, generally, at least for simple things we'll be doing, you can read it and understand what it's doing and then kind of reverse engineer and figure out how it works. So we're going to go ahead and hop in. As I said before, Excel is not a database. So this link I'm providing is the Towards Data Science. They put a lot of great material out. This is just going to be a rundown of Excel versus SQL, you know, big picture. What are the differences? And this comes from an Excel user's perspective, so a lot of you, this will probably ring true for you. They don't go over SQLite here. That's not a big deal. They're all going to be very similar. They have different pros, different cons, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, it's kind of learning the benefits of using Excel versus using SQL, yada, yada, yada. We're not going to read through the article here, but it will be on the notebook that gets posted to the blogs here. If you go download that, you'll have a link right here. So we're using SQL because it's coming native in Python. All we have to do is import SQLite3, no pip install needed. Now, what we need to do is create a database. So I'm just going to define a variable called dbFile, and I'm going to name it testdb.db. That's going to be a database file. Okay, now that does nothing. Okay, all that does is define this variable as that string. If we look at our file location, it's not like it's creating a database just by doing that. What will create a database is creating this connection. So basically you have a database. You need to create a connection to it, and then you can start running commands over it, okay? Think of it like you've got a flash drive. You need to plug it into your computer, and then you can access everything. You can tell your computer whatever you want about what's on that flash drive, but unless you plug it in, it doesn't matter, right? You gotta have it plugged in, you gotta have that connection. The nice thing about SQLite running this connect command is if you pass a database file name, and there's not a database in that location, it will create one for you. So if we run that, and now we look, now we have a testdb.db, and we can see here type database file. So we've created the database file. it's empty right now, okay? And a good way, and you'll need to be careful because it will look to this right here, this path. That's a relative file path for me because I wanted it in the same directory that my Jupyter notebook is in to keep it all together for these tutorials. Makes it easy for me. If you pass a file path to a database that is incorrect, if you have an existing database and you're ready to work in it, it will not tell you that's incorrect. It will just create that database at the new location, and it won't have any of your data in it. So if you come across that, you have your database, you go to work in it at a later point in time, and suddenly your data's not there, just double check your file path. Odds are you just had an errant character or a directory break or something. Point in the wrong spot. Not a big deal. Just be aware of it. It happens. Not the end of the world. So to do work in our database, we need to create what's called a cursor for our connection. And that basically, think of it like your mouse cursor here on your screen. You've connected your flash drive. Cool. But to do anything in it, you need to be able to navigate to it. You need to be able to open it up. You need to be able to select things, right? That's what we're creating here with this cursor. That's our tool, our hammer, our screwdriver, our pen, whatever you want it to be. That is our tool that allows us to write and read things in the database. So we create our cursor, and I just use CUR as a variable there. So what we need to do now, we have an empty database. We need to create a table within our database. And one nifty thing about databases is how interconnected all your data can be. Previously, we would have Excel sheet, Excel sheet, Excel sheet, Excel sheet, right? Different workbooks with different data tables in them. And the only way to connect them together is either to run a bunch of VLOOKUPs in Excel, which is terribly slow and inefficient and a pain and very easy to break and hard to fix because you have a million of them and you don't know where it went wrong. Or loading them all up into pandas individually and trying to join them together that way. That's also inefficient compared to using a database. What we'll want here is for every table you will have what's called a primary key. Okay, it's generally going to be an integer. You're going to have your primary key using player ID here. Now I know we will touch on the importance of this a little bit later, especially in our next video, which is going to be going over like different player names from different sources. But you will want a table that's going to have your players and their respective IDs. And you will want one universal table that for every player to have one ID. And from there, you can break out and connect. For every player, they have a FanDuel ID. They have a DraftKings ID. They have an NBA.com ID. They have a basketball reference ID, okay? Every different data source should be able to connect back to your master list of players with this primary key. And it's called a primary key and a foreign key. Foreign key is going to be the key in the other table it connects to. But that will alleviate all of your concerns about player names being different here, different there, different on FanDuel, different on DraftKings. You have one master player list, and from there you build out and you connect them to however it's spelled and the other databases, other data sources, and you never have to worry about that anymore. As long as you make sure to keep that accurate, it's a one-time connection, and you're good to go. So the primary key is, it's a little bit important, and then you're going to name, you know, your columns in your table and what data type it is. Now, one thing we've gotten a little bit spoiled with in Python is we don't have to define data types when we define a variable. Most languages you do. If you're defining this variable, I would need to define that it is a string, right? Or that it is an integer or a float value. Python figures that out on its own. You can specify if you want to, like if you have very specific controls you need on your data, you can put it in there, but it's not required. It is going to be required here. So we're creating table if not exists. What that means is if a table called players does not exist in our database that we're connected to, we want to create that table. Okay, like I said, pretty simple to read and understand. Within that players table, I want to create these columns. Player ID is an integer and is the primary key. First name is text, last name is text, team is text, and we pass that as a raw string, which is just 3 quotation marks in a row to begin and to end, and that's just going to tell Python or SQL we're passing this large chunk of text, and we want to send that as one big thing because that is one SQL query or command. So we pass that, we're executing this command, that's our execute function, and then we commit it to our connection. So we've created this table. Now we're going to do the same thing but create a teams table. Okay, create table if not exists teams. Team ID, int, primary key. Noticing a trend here? City, text, state, text, team, text, abbreviation, text. Okay, so for this point in time, I've decided those are the relevant pieces of information I need in my players table and my teams table. You can track anything you want, right? But being not just doing the team, but the city, the state, team, and abbreviation, we now have all these different ways we can join data to the teams table. If we want to track how well a player does in a certain state, maybe I don't want to know how good Kevin Porter Jr. just plays in Houston. I want to know how he plays in the state of Texas or the state of California. If we're tracking all of that here, we have it all. We don't have to create another dictionary defining a state and the teams that are within it. We have it already right here. So we're going to do the same thing and create a teams table. And now that we've created those, we're going to input some data. So we're going to execute. Remember, we're doing a raw string, this big bulk entry here. Insert into, okay, makes sense. Players, all right, parenthesis, defining the fields that we are providing data for. Player ID, first name, last name, team, which happens to be all of them in this case, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. And then we pass the values. 0001, Marcus as first name, Smart as last name, Celtics as team. And now we're executing a select statement, which means we're selecting data to view. Star is shorthand in SQL for everything. We could define what columns we wanted to see if we only want to see some of them, but for this instance, we just want to see everything. So select everything from players. And then we fetch all, that's our command to get everything from the query. And we see that is the entry in our table. Now, if we want to put in multiple players at one time, we can do that too. I'm going to create a list variable called new players. We're going to do 0002, Jason, Tatum, Celtics, and 0003, LeBron, James, Lakers. Now, you may notice that within the list, we have parentheses too. That's because I'm passing these data points as a tuple. Okay, now we haven't done much specifically on data types in Python, but a tuple is basically going to be a list with very tight controls, okay? So it's more efficient, it condenses it, they're stuck together in that way. You cannot edit a tuple once you define it. Okay, so it's going to be more set in stone, more concrete. That is how SQL is going to want our data to be passed, is in a tuple, which is fine. Basically just take the list of information, put parentheses around instead of brackets. Now they are within a list, so this is a list of tuples. And then we're executing many, insert into players, and I'm putting in all of the fields. So I'm going to do values, and the way it can like that is with some question marks there, because we're doing values multiple times over, and we're passing this list. We're going to commit it, and we're going to select again. And now you'll see we still have Marcus Smart, but now we have Jason Tatum and LeBron James also there. Now we're going to do the same thing to insert some teams here. We're going to do the Boston Celtics, LA Lakers, you can see. Boston, Massachusetts Celtics, Boston, Los Angeles, California Lakers, LAL. We're going to insert into new teams. Or insert into teams our new teams item here, which is the list of team tuples. And we're going to select that. And we see we have it. What we're going to do is we're going to do a few operations on our database here. Kind of give you an idea of how it works. So let's see, we're doing another execute function. We are selecting teams.team, players.firstname, players.lastname, okay? So here you can see I'm defining the columns that I want now, and I'm defining columns for multiple tables. So I'm doing select teams.team and players.firstname and players.lastname from, and I like to have this spaced out a certain way to make it easier to read for me. So we're selecting what we want. What do we want it from? We want it from teams, and we're going to left join players on players.team equals teams.team. So we're left joining players on players.team equals teams.team. Okay, and we went over joins recently, and then we're going to print that. We're going to see what it looks like. So now we can see we have the team, player first name, player last name, and we left joined on the team name from teams equals team. Okay, but you don't really get much, you can't really tell much from that, can you? Right, because you're joining them, but you also have, you know, Celtics in the player column. Okay, but we selected from teams, and we also got the player names, so that logic is important to note. So now let's do another one where we're going to select and query a little bit. So we're going to select the same thing with the exact same left join, but where teams.team equals Celtics. Well, look at that. Now we're only getting Celtics players. So that where function is where we're going to query. And see what I mean on how this kind of makes sense. We're selecting columns from a table, left joining table, and we're defining how we're joining that. And then we want that data where teams.team equals Celtics. Okay, that makes sense. We can understand that without being SQL experts. We're going to try another one. We're going to select from teams again, left join on players, but now we want where teams.team equals Lakers. Okay, now we have Lakers LeBron James. Singular item because we only have one entry in our table that matches that. Okay, now we're going to select teams again, left join players again, but now we're going to do where teams.state equals California. Gives us the same thing. You see where I'm going here? Any piece of data we have in here, we're joining the teams table with the player table on the team value, but we can still query by other columns in the teams table. So now we're querying by the state. Okay, even though we're joining by player, we're querying by state. So it is pretty broad. It is very powerful what you can do and how easy it is to do it. And just one more, we're going to execute, select everything from players where team equals Celtics. We get the same thing. And then we close our connection, and we're no longer connected to our database. And that is going to be our basic here. Just to give you an idea, we're going to take a look at Sqlitebrowser.org as well. Let me go ahead and download that for you guys real quick. So, what Sqlitebrowser.org is it's going to be a graphical user interface that will allow us to interact with our database as well. So if we open our database here, we can see we have two tables, okay? Player and team. We can see what columns we have. We can see what teams we have, okay? We can browse the table and see what I have here. We can see the structure. We can execute SQL commands here. Okay. We did not commit when we added the teams to teams table. Okay? Remember, we did not commit that. Nor could we after the fact because it was already temporarily in our table. Now, it was here for us to use temporarily. All right, we could query on it. We were using it. If we come look at our DB browser here and we open the teams table, it's empty. Okay, nothing was saved in the teams table because we did not commit it. Whereas the players, they're here. So if we come back, let's restart this whole shaboozle. If we come back here and we insert our teams again, and we commit it, close it out. Now we have teams values, okay? So if you want something to stay there beyond your current session, you need to commit the cursor. Otherwise, it's just there temporarily, being stored in memory for you to access, but it will not be there for good. All right? So we're not going to do a whole lot in here. I just wanted to show you, if you're not comfortable with all of this in a Jupyter notebook and it makes you feel better to be able to see it, I get it. I completely understand that. There are options. You can create new databases here. Like if it's faster for you to run through and sit down one day and create all your databases in here and have them to access with Python, that's fine too, you know? It's your system. Whatever works best for you is best for you. Okay, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that something's not good for you if you clearly know that it is. So that's gonna be it for today. We've gone over the basics, some very basic querying, creation, utilizing, how to make sure we're using it right, how to visualize it outside of our Jupyter notebook with an actual GUI. We're gonna slowly build on databases as we go. This isn't something we're gonna tackle all in one series, because it's gonna factor in. We need to bring in web scraping. We need to figure out how we're gonna tie all our data together. This is really step one of the rest of it, I guess. We have finally done a basic introduction for pretty much everything we're going to need to do, outside of more unique one-off type things. But for the most part, I think every one of you, if you've been watching the videos this day, you have everything you need to hit the ground running and go for it, right? So what we're going to be doing going forward is doing just that. We're going to hit the ground running. We're going to start actually thinking about what types of stats we want, how we want to break up our data, how we want to utilize our data, how we're going to save and manage and access our data, how we're going to build our models, what types of models we're going to build. And from this point forward, we will be looking at more of a functional system, not just a one-off how-to video, right? We're going to be looking at how can I do this to give myself an edge for daily fantasy purposes. Now, I'm not here to give you the game-winning model that's going to win you millions and millions of dollars, okay? That's not what I'm here for, but I am here to make sure that you have the tools you need to do that, because you believe that you have an edge with your knowledge up here. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing this right now. You are looking for a way to take what's up here and put it in the computer and let the computer help you get the most out of that edge, right? That's what we're all here for, and that's what we're trying to do. So I hope you guys are looking forward to it as much as I am. I know it's been a little over a year now since I started making videos, and we're just now getting to the point of into the really good fun stuff where we're really making strides, but I think it's worthwhile to do all of this to lay that foundation. Otherwise we'd hit spots and people wouldn't know what's going on and yada yada yada, and we'd be constantly back and forth, and that nobody likes that. So as always, big thank you to everyone in the Patreon. I sincerely support your support of me now. I sincerely thank everybody in there for everything they do, and it means a lot to me that you guys are still there, especially the few of you that have been there pretty much since the very beginning. It means a lot. I appreciate it more than I could ever put into words, and if anybody else wants to join and be a part of that, links down in the description. Little as $5 a month. All of the money that comes in through the Patreon gets reinvested back into this channel. That you can be sure of. I want to make these better for you guys, and every little bit that comes in allows me to get better equipment, and prepare a little bit better, and justify putting more time into it when maybe I'm a little bit busier than normal. So thank you to everybody. This would not be happening today and the quality that it is happening if it were not for all of you. So thank yourselves. Everybody not on the Patreon, feel free to thank them down in the comments, because they mean a whole lot to this channel, as do everybody else watching it, dropping comments, posing questions. The number of times I've made a video off of a discussion that happened in the comments has been several. So I appreciate all of it. I hope you're excited, and I'll see you next time.